He told the board of directors that I was nothing more than a floor manager who had overstayed his welcome in the front office. He stood there with his expensive haircut and his tailored suit, gesturing at a projected slide deck that read Lean Operational Footprint Phase 1 in letters large enough to be read from the parking lot. I had been buying shares of the company for 23 years, and I owned far more of the enterprise than his mother did, but he had absolutely no idea. The conference room smelled like old coffee and brand new carpet. Maxwell Precision Alloys had spent $40,000 renovating this room 6 months ago, bringing in new leather chairs, frosted glass panels on the doors, and modern lighting. The 20-foot mahogany table stayed because you do not replace mahogany. Julian Kincaid stood at the head of it, clicking through his slides. His MacBook Pro was open in front of him, and his eyes kept drifting down to it mid-sentence like he was reading cue cards for his own authority. 8 people sat around that table, and none of them looked comfortable. A few shifted in their leather chairs, looking down at their notes. One kept clicking a pen cap, stopping, then starting again. Behind Julian, a young woman named Clara Jenkins, 29, stood holding a tablet against her chest like a shield, staring at the carpet. I sat at the far end of the table, quiet, with my hands folded on the dark wood. "Harvey," Julian said, and he did not even look up from the screen when he said it. "Effective today, your role is being restructured. We are transitioning you from Vice President of Manufacturing Operations to Shift Supervisor on the foundry floor. Your compensation will be adjusted accordingly to align with the scope of this new position. We are looking at a 40% reduction in your salary." That meant going from $310,000 a year to $186,000. A cut of $124,000, delivered with the flat tone of a weather report. He adjusted his tie, which was made of silk and cost more than a floor worker made in a week. His manicured hands had never touched a piece of heavy machinery in this building or any other. He was 28 years old, and he had given himself the title of Chief Restructuring Officer, a role created by his mother, who served as the board chair. None of this was complicated. "I understand," I said. Just 2 words, delivered without a tremor. He looked up for the first time briefly before looking back at his screen. He took my calm for surrender, which is what arrogant people usually do. "My name is Harvey Vance. I am 55 years old. I spent 8 years in the United States Marine Corps as a combat engineer, holding the rank of Staff Sergeant, E6, at the time of my honorable discharge. I survived 2 deployments, and my specialty was demolitions, structural analysis, and field fortification. I learned 2 things in the military that never left me. The first is how to stay completely calm when something is about to detonate. You do not rush a fuse, you read it, you count the seconds, and you breathe. The second is how to analyze a room that does not know it has already lost the war. I had been at Maxwell Precision Alloys for 23 years. I walked in the door at 32, straight off active duty, and started on the foundry floor. It was the exact same floor where my career had first begun. I came to the company because a military buddy told me they were hiring, and the specialty metals industry made sense to a man who had spent 8 years understanding what happens to structures under intense pressure. I started as a basic floor worker, pouring alloys, running ladles, and learning the furnaces by number, then by sound, and eventually by smell. You can tell when a batch of nickel chromium is off by a fraction of a percent, just from the color of the pour if you have watched enough of them, and I had watched thousands. I moved from floor worker to floor supervisor in 2 years. I went from supervisor to plant manager in 4. 11 years ago, I was named Vice President of Manufacturing Operations. Every single promotion was earned on actual output, not office politics. Every year, I followed the same routine. Do the work, skip the corporate games, cash the performance bonus, and buy the company stock. That last part mattered far more than anyone in that room knew. My wife, Linda Vance, died 6 years ago from ovarian cancer. It was 18 months of fighting from the initial diagnosis to the end. She was a high school chemistry teacher who remembered the name of every student she ever taught, and they remembered hers. The church was standing room only at her service. I was not there for her last week of life. There was a critical rupture in foundry. Line 3, A catastrophic seal failure in the primary containment housing. If it had blown fully, we were looking at $34 million in equipment damage and 3 months of lost production. I drove to the plant at 2 in the morning and did not leave the facility for 6 days. I managed the repair sequence personally, overseeing every weld, every pressure test, and every recalibration. I saved the line, the production schedule, and the company. Nobody sent flowers to the hospital. When my bonus came that quarter, I reinvested all of it into company stock, purchasing 4,400 shares at the employee discount rate. Zachary was 16 at the time. My son did not understand why his father was not there at the end, or why the nurses said goodbye to his mother without me in the room. He is 22 now, finishing his senior year of mechanical engineering at Ohio State. He calls me every Sunday, and he is a far better man than I deserve. I still do not have a good answer for him about that week, and I am not sure one exists. But I kept buying the stock. Let me explain how a man ends up owning 61% of a $1.8 billion company without anyone on the board of directors noticing. It starts with a simple pen. During my first year at Maxwell Precision Alloys, the founder, George Maxwell, walked the foundry floor every Friday. He was 74 back then, still sharp, and he always smelled like cigar smoke and machine oil. He would stop at every station, ask a question, and actually listen to the answer. He stopped at my station in November of my first year and watched me calibrate a pouring sequence I had redesigned to reduce slag waste by 12%. He did not say anything for a full minute. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a silver pen with an engraving that read Maxwell Precision Alloys Year 1. "Own what you build, son," he told me. "Paper without equity is just paper." George Maxwell died 9 years later, but I kept the pen and I did exactly what he told me to do. It began with the employee stock purchase plan. The company offered shares at a 15% discount to employees who reinvested their performance bonuses. Most people took the cash to buy trucks or pay off credit cards, but I took the stock every single quarter. A fractions of a percent here, a full point there. It adds up when you are patient and nobody is paying attention. Then came the private purchases. 3 retreat executives, over the span of 14 years, held modest blocks of company shares and wanted to sell them quickly. The first was Joseph Kent, a vice president of procurement who retired 18 years ago and wanted liquidity to buy a lake house. I bought his entire block at a negotiated price. The second was Gerald Fowler, the director of quality assurance who retired 14 years ago. It was the same story. The third was Stephen Albright, the outgoing chief financial officer, who retired 9 years ago and wanted a clean break from the corporate world. I gave him one. Every transaction was documented, every transfer was legally filed, and every disclosure was submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission on time under the name of the Vance Holdings Trust. The trust was the idea of my close friend Gordon Baxter. Gordon and I served together in the Marines in the same unit. We were both staff sergeants and combat engineers. He transitioned to law after his discharge and ended up specializing in corporate securities and shareholder rights at a mid-sized firm in Columbus. He is 57 now, and he is the only person alive who knows my full ownership position. Gordon set up the Vance Holdings Trust 22 years ago. During my second year at the company, he filed the original paperwork, tracked every single acquisition, and submitted every Securities and Exchange Commission Form 4 and Schedule 13D filing. When my beneficial ownership crossed the 5% threshold, then 10%, then 20, 30, and eventually 50%, it was all recorded. It was all publicly accessible, sitting in the Eidgard database, completely legal and entirely invisible to anyone who did not bother to search. The last time anyone on the board of directors reviewed the full ownership filings was 10 years ago, in 2014. By then, my trust was already past 50%. "File it under the trust," Gordon told me early on. "You can always assign it later." I never did. Gordon also made sure I understood Article 7 of the Corporate Charter, which contained the Emergency Shareholder Governance Clause. He read it to me over black coffee in a quiet Columbus diner 8 years ago and told me it was my insurance policy, hoping I would never need to use it. The language was highly specific. In the event that any officer of the corporation takes unilateral action affecting the compensation, title, or duties of any employee holding a majority stake in the corporation's issued shares without the prior written consent of said shareholder, that shareholder may invoke Article 7 to convene an emergency board session within 36 hours for the purpose of reviewing the action and its authorization. I owned 61% of Maxwell Precision Alloys, with a market value of approximately $1.098 billion. A 28-year-old with a business degree, a self-appointed title that was never ratified by a full board resolution, and 14 months of consulting experience had just cut my salary by 40%, without asking the board, the legal department, or the general counsel. I did not slam the conference room door. I did not raise my voice. I did not say a single word to anyone on the way out of the building. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and rode it down to the parking garage alone. The fluorescent lights hummed the same way they had hummed for over 2 decades. The concrete smelled like oil and cold air. I sat in my truck for exactly 2 minutes. Linda's photograph was still clipped to the sun visor, showing her laughing with Zachary on her lap when he was 11 years old. I pulled out my phone and called Gordon Baxter. He picked up on the second ring and did not say hello. "I have been waiting for this call for about 7 years," he said. Gordon did not rush. Marines do not rush fuses, and securities lawyers do not rush filings. But he did not waste a single second either. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. I told him every detail. The renovated conference room, the slide deck, the demotion to shift supervisor, and the 40% salary reduction from $310,000 to $186,000. I described the 8 people in the room who watched it happen. Clara Jenkins standing with her tablet, and Julian's laptop open the entire time. Gordon was silent for 4 seconds, and I could hear the sound of his pen writing. His title, Julian's title, Gordon asked, Chief Restructuring Officer. Was it ratified by a full board resolution? No, I replied. I am certain. I have read every board resolution for the last 11 years, and there is no vote authorizing that title. His mother created the position and installed him. 3 directors objected, but she overrode them, and he took unilateral action affecting your compensation, title, and duties without your prior written consent. He did, I said. Then Article 7 is live, Gordon said, and I heard his chair creak. I will have the filing ready by 6:30 in the evening. It will be an emergency shareholder action under Article 7 of the corporate charter, submitted on behalf of the Vance Holdings Trust, the beneficial owner of 61% of issued shares. The board will be required to convene within 36 hours, which puts us at Thursday morning at 10 in the morning if they move fast, and they will move fast once the general counsel sees what is in the database. I looked at Linda's photo on the sun visor. Do it, I said. Already started, Gordon replied, and the line went dead. It was 4:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I did not do any of the typical things in the next 18 hours. I did not call Julian Kincaid, I did not call his mother, Eleanor, and I did not contact anyone else at the company. I did not send an email, post anything online, or update my professional profiles. I did not walk back into the building to tell anyone what was coming. I simply drove home. I fed Rex, my 11-year-old yellow lab, who knew something had shifted the moment I walked through the door. Dogs always know. He did not bring me his tennis ball. He just sat next to my chair and put his chin on my knee. I poured 3 fingers of bourbon from the good bottle Linda had given me the Christmas before she got sick. I had been saving it for a special occasion, though I had never been sure what that would be. It turned out to be this. I sat on the back deck and watched the sky turn dark over the Foundry District. You could see the Maxwell smokestacks from my house. I had purchased the home 19 years ago, for that exact reason, even though Linda thought I was crazy for wanting to stare at work from the porch. She had laughed and signed the mortgage papers anyway. I could see the lights in the executive suite on the 3rd floor. In the corner office that used to be mine before Julian moved into it 7 months ago, the lights were still on. I let him enjoy it. At 6:32 in the evening, Gordon texted me 2 words, filing completed. The clock is running. I finished my drink, went inside, washed the glass, and went to bed, sleeping 7 hours straight for the first time in months. While I slept, the digital fuse burned. Gordon's filing arrived in the corporate secretary's inbox at 6:32 in the evening. Beatrice Walsh, 58, who had held that role for 14 years, opened the document at 7:15 while eating leftover soup at her desk. She read the first paragraph twice, then immediately called the general counsel, Preston Campbell. Preston did not answer because he was at dinner with his wife, so Beatrice left a voicemail explaining that they had received an emergency shareholder action under Article 7 from the Vance Holdings Trust, claiming beneficial ownership of 61% of issued shares. Preston listened to the message at 9:40 in the evening and called her back immediately, asking who had filed it. When she said the Vance Holdings Trust, he asked if it was linked to Harvey Vance. Preston Campbell had been the general counsel for 9 years. He was 63 years old, careful, competent, and deeply uncomfortable with how Julian had treated me. He had not been consulted before the demotion. Julian had not asked him or anyone else. Julian had simply walked into that room with his slides and his self-appointed title, restructuring a veteran officer without legal review or board authorization, and without checking who owned the company he was trying to run. Preston sat down at his desk at 10:15 in the evening, opened the database, and typed Maxwell Precision Alloys into the search field. The filings loaded, and he started with the most recent amendment filed 8 months ago. The beneficial owner was listed as the Vance Holdings Trust, holding 61% of the shares. He scrolled backward through years of filings, finding every Form 4 and Schedule 13D amendment. Every single transaction was documented and filed on schedule. He printed all 47 pages. Preston told me later that his hand started shaking by page 9. He had loosened his tie by page 22, and by page 38 he was drinking whiskey. By the time he finished page 47, he was sitting completely still, staring at the wall. The filing was immaculate because Gordon Baxter does not make mistakes. He builds paper trails the way we used to build bunker fortifications. Every angle was covered, every approach anticipated, and every document was legally load-bearing. Preston picked up his phone at 11:12 at night. He did not call Julian. He called Eleanor Kincaid, who answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was controlled. "Preston, it is late," she said. "I need you at headquarters first thing tomorrow morning," Preston replied. "Your son signed something he shouldn't have." "What does that mean?" she asked. "Harvey Vance owns 61% of this company," Preston said. "He has for years. It is all in the public filings. Your son just demoted him without board authorization, without legal review, and without the prior written consent of the majority shareholder." There was complete silence on the line for 5 seconds. "That is not possible," Eleanor said. "I am looking at 47 pages of evidence that says it is," Preston replied. "He is a floor manager," Eleanor insisted. "He has been a shareholder for 23 years, Preston said. "He owns more of this company than every board member combined, including you." Another long silence followed. "Article 7 has been invoked," Preston continued. "We are legally required to convene the board within 36 hours, which puts us at Thursday morning at 10 in the morning. I need every director notified by 8 tomorrow morning. I must also inform you that Julian's title of Chief Restructuring Officer was never ratified by the board, meaning his authority to restructure anyone's compensation is legally void ab initio under state corporate law." Eleanor did not speak for nearly 10 seconds. When she finally did, her voice was much quieter. "Does Julian know?" she asked. "No," Preston said. "Do not tell him yet. Let him walk into the boardroom thinking he is still in charge." But Eleanor did not handle it that night. While she sat in her bedroom processing the fact that her son had kicked a hornet's nest the size of a $1 billion trust, Julian was posting on social media. His online story, posted at 11:47 at night, showed a glass of champagne on my old desk. The caption read, "Day 1 of the new era, first move made." He had no idea the board had already been convened. I woke up on Wednesday morning at 5:30, made fresh coffee, fed Rex, and stood on the back deck watching the smokestacks against the gray sky. My phone was on the kitchen table, and when I finally checked it at 6:50 in the morning, I had 14 missed calls. 3 were from unrecognized numbers, 6 were from Preston Campbell's office and cell, 1 was from Eleanor Kincaid, and 4 were from Julian. I did not return any of them. Instead, I poured a second cup of coffee and read a text from Diane Foster, the floor operations manager, which had arrived at 6:18 in the morning. "Harvey, something is happening," she wrote. Preston Campbell arrived at 6 in the morning, and Eleanor Kincaid pulled in right behind him. "Julian is not here yet, and nobody will tell us anything, but the executive floor is locked down. They are setting up conference room A for a full board session." I texted back 3 words, "Thanks, Diane." She replied immediately, "Board session on a Wednesday?" I did not answer. At the office, Preston Campbell had walked Eleanor through every page of the filing, showing her every share acquisition and the trust structure. When they got to the details of the Vance Holdings Trust, Eleanor sat down. "Gordon Baxter," she said, reading the attorney's name. "Former Marine, same unit as Harvey. He has been managing this trust for 22 years. "It is bulletproof, Eleanor," Preston told Eleanor. "Every disclosure was filed on time. This is the majority shareholder asserting rights we did not know he had, because nobody on this board has reviewed the ownership filings in 10 years. Eleanor's hands were flat on the table. "My son demoted a man who owns 61% of the company," she said. "Yes," Preston replied, without asking anyone, using an unratified title. "Yes." She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, then told him to convene the board for Thursday at 10 in the morning. Preston added that Julian had posted a photo of champagne on my desk the night before, and that it was already screenshotted and included in the filing appendix as evidence of unilateral corporate waste. Eleanor looked out the window at the parking lot as Julian's sports car pulled into his reserved spot. "He does not know yet," she said. "Do not tell him until Thursday. Let him learn what a room looks like when the decision has already been made." Meanwhile, I spent Wednesday doing 3 simple things. I drove to the hardware store and bought a new metal hinge for my back gate, which had been sticking since October. I replaced it in about 40 minutes. Then I drove to the diner on Route 9, ordered a Turkey Club sandwich and black coffee, and sat by the window eating lunch. Rex rode in the passenger seat for both trips because he likes hardware stores. At 3:15 in the afternoon, Gordon called to confirm that the board meeting was set for Thursday, at 10 in the morning, and all 9 directors had been notified. "They have all seen the documents," Gordon said. "I spoke to Preston Campbell and he is embarrassed, not hostile. He admitted he had not pulled the ownership filings in 9 years, because he assumed the institutional knowledge was current." He also confirmed Julian's title was never ratified. The directors are furious that a 28-year-old with an unratified title exposed a $1.8 billion company to such legal risk without consulting the legal department. Eleanor has been in Preston's office all day and has not spoken to her son. I looked at Linda's photo on the visor. "What is the plan?" I asked. "We show up at 9:30, Gordon said. "I want to be seated when they walk in. Wear the good suit." I told him I would. On Thursday morning, October 17th, I woke up early and put on the charcoal suit Linda had helped me pick out 11 years ago. She had told me it made me look like I owned something. I adjusted my tie in the mirror, slipped George Maxwell's silver pen into my breast pocket, and drove to the plant. I parked in the main lot where the floor workers park, just as I had for 23 years. The building looked the same, with the limestone facade and the company logo etched above the doors. I walked through the entrance at 9:41 in the morning. The security guard, Dennis Furman, 62, who had worked that desk for 16 years, did something he had never done before. He stood up. "Mr. Vance," he said, nodding. "Morning, Dennis," I replied. Gordon was waiting outside conference room A with his scuffed leather briefcase. He looked at me and I looked at him. "You ready?" he asked. "I have been ready for 7 years," I told him. "Let us go own a boardroom." The doors to conference room A were made of frosted glass and heavy mahogany, the exact same room where I had been demoted 48 hours earlier. The nameplates were set at every seat, and the 9 directors were already seated, their faces tense. Preston Campbell sat with a massive stack of papers, and Beatrice Walsh sat behind him with a legal pad. Eleanor Kincaid sat at the head of the table, her hands flat on the wood and her face gray. At the opposite end of the table was a single empty chair with a nameplate that read Vance Holdings Trust Majority Shareholder. I sat down, placed George Maxwell's silver pen on the table and folded my hands. The clock read 9:58 in the morning. At 9:59, the door opened and Julian Kincaid walked in, wearing a new suit and carrying his laptop. He looked confident until he saw the name plates, the 9 directors, and me sitting at the opposite end of the table. "Mom, what is this?" he asked. Eleanor did not look at him. "Sit down, Julian," she said. He did not sit immediately, adjusting his tie and saying he had the Phase 2 deck ready, but she repeated her order. Preston Campbell stood up and announced that the emergency session was convened under Article 7 of the Corporate Charter, based on a filing by the Vance Holdings Trust on behalf of Harvey Vance. He explained that Julian had taken unilateral action affecting the compensation and duties of a majority shareholder without consent. Julian opened his laptop, but Eleanor told him to close it. Preston continued, stating that the trust held 61% of the company's shares, a position documented in SEC filings for 22 years. He noted that at the current valuation, my stake represented approximately $1.098 billion. Director Peter Hargrove leaned back and sighed, while Martha Keller closed her eyes. Julian looked at me, his confidence vanishing. "Those filings cannot be right," he stammered. "They are completely bulletproof," Gordon said from behind me. "Every transfer was legally executed and filed on schedule. I built the structure myself." Preston then added that Julian's title of Chief Restructuring Officer was never ratified by the board, making his actions legally void ab initio under state corporate law. Julian's hands were flat on the table, and he had lost all color. He tried to claim it was a clerical issue, but Eleanor silenced him. Preston called the vote on a motion to reverse all of Julian's actions and terminate his position immediately. One by one, the directors voted. Peter Hargrove voted in favor, followed by Martha Keller and the rest of the board. When it was Eleanor's turn, she looked at her son and voted in favor as well. The vote was 9-0, unanimous. "The motion carries," Preston said. "Mr. Kincaid, your position is terminated immediately. Security will escort you to collect your belongings, and your access credentials will be revoked." Julian stood up, his chair rolling back. He looked at me and said that on Tuesday, I had sat there and said I understood. I looked back at him and told him I did understand, far better than he did. The door opened, and Dennis Furman walked in with another security officer. Julian walked out, and the doors closed. The board session continued for another 2 hours. The directors voted unanimously to appoint me interim chief executive officer, restoring my compensation and upgrading it. Within 30 days, the board approved a $47 million special dividend distribution, and my 61% stake entitled me to $28.7 million. Within 60 days, minority shareholders filed a $67 million lawsuit against Julian Kincaid personally for breach of fiduciary duty and exposing the company to corporate waste. Eleanor Kincaid resigned from the board a week later. Diane Foster was promoted Director of Floor Operations, a role she had earned 18 years ago. I kept the corner office, placed Linda's photo on the desk, and put George Maxwell's silver pen in the top drawer. On Sunday, Zachary called right on schedule. "Dad, you sound different," he said, "less like you are waiting for something." I leaned back in my chair on the deck, Rex lying at my feet. "Maybe I am not," I said, asking if he wanted me to come to his softball scrimmage next Saturday. "Really?" he asked. I told him I would be there, and he was quiet for a second before saying that was really good. After we hung up, I sat watching the sky go dark over the Foundry District. Julian Kincaid had told a boardroom I was just a floor manager, and he was right about one thing. I knew every floor in that building. I knew the furnaces, the pours, the pressure thresholds, and the people. He just did not know that I also owned the building. Power does not need to announce itself on social media or give itself unratified titles. Sometimes it just shows up every quarter, patient and documented. And when the fuse finally reaches the charge, it does not make a sound until everything has already changed. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching.